Texas, 1878. The drought had lasted so long that Quinn Norwood had begun to think water itself was just a myth folks told to keep hope alive. 3 summers of parched earth, of cattle dropping dead in the scrubland, of men losing everything they had. 3 summers that had hardened a young man faster than time had any right to do. Quinn wiped dust from his face as he stared across the cracked landscape of his struggling ranch. At 25, his eyes held the weathered look of a man who'd lived double that. Not that anyone would call him old. His lean frame, strong jawline, and the golden-brown hair that fell in waves just above his collar spoke of youth. But the frontier had a way of aging a man's soul while his body was still young. "No use waiting on clouds that ain't coming," he muttered, adjusting his worn Stetson. 500 acres of Texas grassland, once lush enough to support a fine herd, now barely kept 30 head of cattle alive. The drought had taken everything else: his father 2 years back, his mother's will to live shortly after, and most recently, his belief that a man could build something permanent in this unforgiving land. Quinn had come to believe a hard truth. The frontier was no place for putting down roots, no place for dreams beyond survival, certainly no place for the kind of love his parents had shared. Love made you vulnerable, and vulnerability got you killed out west. Better to be self-reliant, to need no one. He mounted his dun gelding and nudged it toward the northeastern boundary. The creek that marked his property line had been dry for months, but he still rode the perimeter daily, checking for cattle that might have wandered in search of water, for predators, both animal and human. Routine kept him sane in a world gone mad with thirst. As he approached the creek bed, something caught his eye: movement where there should be none. Quinn tensed, hand dropping to the Colt revolver at his hip. Raiders had been hitting isolated ranches, taking what little water and supplies remained. He'd buried 2 neighbors this summer already, but instead of raiders, he saw a covered wagon tilted precariously in the dry creek bed, one wheel broken clean off its axle. A woman stood beside it, attempting to calm a frantic horse while shouting directions at someone still inside the wagon. Quinn approached cautiously. "Hello there," he called, keeping a respectable distance. "Looks like you've got trouble." The woman spun around, startled. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with hair the color of sun-ripened wheat pulled back in a practical but hastily arranged knot. Her blue calico dress, though dusty from travel, looked well-made, a touch too fine for frontier journeying. What caught Quinn most were her eyes, bright, determined, and currently narrowed with suspicion. "We're managing just fine," she said, though the broken wheel and the way her hands trembled on the horse's reins suggested otherwise. "Olivia," a male voice called from inside the wagon. "Who is it?" "Just a passerby," she answered, not taking her eyes off Quinn. "Ma'am," Quinn said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that axles split clean through. "You're not going anywhere without help." The wagon's canvas parted, and an older man emerged, gray-haired, spectacled, and moving with the careful steps of someone nursing an injury. "I'm afraid he's right, Olivia." "We could use some assistance." The woman, Olivia, pressed her lips together, clearly disliking their predicament. "This is my uncle," she finally said. "Professor Richard Hammond. I'm Olivia Hayes." "Quinn Norwood," he replied with a slight nod. "This is my land you've broken down on. Ranch is about 3 miles west." He gestured toward the horizon where his modest ranch house stood. "What brings you folks out to this forsaken stretch of nowhere?" The professor spoke up. "We were bound for Austin. My niece has accepted a position teaching at the new school there." Quinn raised an eyebrow. A schoolteacher. That explained the proper speech and the way she held herself, straight-backed and dignified despite their circumstances. "Austin's still 40 miles south," Quinn said, "and you've got no chance of making it with that wagon in this condition. Perhaps you could direct us to the nearest town where we might find a wheelwright," the professor asked hopefully. Quinn almost laughed. "Nearest town with a proper wheelwright is Sweetwater, 20 miles east, and not a drop of water between here and there." He glanced at their single horse, the low supply of water visible in their barrels. "You wouldn't make 5 miles in this heat." Olivia Hayes stepped forward. "What do you suggest then, Mr. Norwood?" Quinn studied her for a moment. Common sense told him to give them directions and ride on. The ranch barely had enough supplies for him, let alone 2 strangers, but something in the woman's eyes, a mixture of pride and barely concealed fear, stirred something he thought the drought had killed long ago. "I can offer you shelter while we fix your wagon," he found himself saying. Got tools at the ranch, might have parts that'll work, can't promise much in the way of comfort. Relief flooded the professor's face, but Olivia remained cautious. That's very kind, but we wouldn't want to impose. Not kindness, ma'am, just common sense. Out here, we help when we can because tomorrow it might be us needing the help. The words came automatically, something his father would have said, though Quinn had stopped believing them long ago. After a brief consultation with her uncle, Olivia nodded. We accept your offer, Mr. Norwood, thank you. It took the better part of an hour to transfer their essential belongings to Quinn's horse and prepare to move. The professor, Quinn discovered, had fallen the previous day and wrenched his knee badly. He could barely walk without assistance. I'll take your uncle on my horse, Quinn said. You can ride your own. We'll come back for the wagon and the rest of your things tomorrow. As they made their slow way toward the ranch house, Quinn found himself wondering what madness had possessed him to invite strangers into his home. 3 years of drought had taught him that survival meant looking out for himself first, yet here he was, guiding a limping professor and a stubborn schoolteacher across his parched land. The answer came unbidden as he glanced back at Olivia Hayes, her back straight as a pine, as she urged her tired horse forward. There was something in her determined grace that reminded him of his mother before grief had hollowed her out, something that spoke of a strength the frontier hadn't yet beaten down. Quinn quickly turned away. Such thoughts were dangerous, like rain clouds that promised water but delivered only lightning. In this unforgiving land, hope was often more deadly than despair. The ranch house appeared on the horizon, a modest 2-bedroom structure with a small barn and corral beside it. Nothing fancy, but solid, built by his father's hands with the belief that it would shelter generations of Norwoods. It's not much, Quinn said as they approached, suddenly aware of how sparse and utilitarian his home must appear to outsiders. It looks sturdy, Olivia replied, her voice softening slightly. That counts for more than pretty out here. The simple observation, so aligned with frontier thinking, surprised him. Perhaps this schoolteacher understood more about survival than he'd given her credit for. As Quinn helped the professor down from his horse, the older man winced in pain. I fear I've become quite the burden, he said apologetically. Uncle, you're injured, not a burden, Olivia said firmly. Quinn led them inside, showing them to the small bedroom that had once been his parents'. It had remained untouched since his mother's passing 6 months earlier. You can take this room, he said, uncomfortable with the intimate glimpse into his life that the room provided, his mother's shawl still draped over a chair, his father's books stacked neatly on a small table. Olivia noticed his discomfort. This was your parents' room, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Quinn answered simply, offering no further explanation. Where are they now? Professor Hammond asked innocently. 6 feet under the big oak behind the house, Quinn replied, his tone flat. Father took fever 2 summers ago. Mother just gave up this past winter. Olivia's eyes softened with genuine sympathy. I'm very sorry, Mr. Norwood. Quinn nodded curtly, uncomfortable with her compassion. I'll get some water heated. You both look like you could use a wash after being on the trail. He turned quickly, eager to escape the sudden intimacy of the moment. As he pumped water from the well, grateful that it still produced a trickle, despite the drought, Quinn berated himself for revealing even that small piece of personal history. The last thing he needed was pity from strangers who would be gone as soon as their wagon was fixed. Inside, he could hear them talking in low voices, and the sound of life in his empty house stirred memories he'd worked hard to suppress. The quiet laughter of his mother, his father's deep voice reading aloud in the evenings, the small rituals of family that had once filled these rooms. That night, after a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Quinn sat on the porch, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette and watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. The door creaked open behind him and Olivia Hayes stepped out, now wearing a simple navy skirt and white blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. May I join you? She asked, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air. Quinn gestured to the empty chair beside him. Your uncle settled in. Yes, thank you. The liniment you provided has eased his pain considerably. Silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Quinn was acutely aware of her presence, the subtle scent of lavender, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. You've been alone here since your mother passed, she finally asked. Yes. That must be difficult. Quinn shrugged. It's the way of things out here. People die, land remains. Is that why you stay, for the land? The question caught him off guard. No one had asked him that before. "It's mine," he said simply. Then, feeling that was insufficient, "My father believed in this place, thought it would support generations of Norwoods." "And what do you believe, Mr. Norwood?" Quinn took a long drag of his cigarette, considering her question. "I believe the West takes more than it gives," he said finally, "but I've nowhere else to go." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "My parents died in a fire when I was 16, she said softly. "Uncle Richard took me in, made sure I got my education. Teaching is all I know, all I have." Quinn studied her profile in the moonlight. There was a vulnerability in her confession that made him uncomfortable, not because it was inappropriate, but because it invited reciprocal openness. "Why Austin?" he asked instead of pursuing the personal thread, a fresh start. "Uncle Richard has research he wants to pursue at the university, and she paused. "I was engaged to be married last year. It ended poorly." "I'm sorry to hear that," Quinn said, meaning it. Olivia gave a small, sad smile. "Don't be, he wasn't worth the heartache, but sometimes you need new horizons to leave old sorrows behind." The simple wisdom of her words struck Quinn. Wasn't that what he'd been avoiding? New horizons meant change, and change meant risk. Easier to stay rooted in familiar pain than venture into unknown possibilities. "Well," he said, standing abruptly, "dawn comes early. We should both get some rest if we're going to fetch that wagon tomorrow." Olivia rose gracefully. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Norwood. It's rare to find such kindness from strangers these days." "Not kindness," Quinn corrected her. "Just common sense." But as he lay in his bed later, staring at the ceiling, Quinn knew it wasn't common sense that had prompted him to help. It was something he'd thought long dead, a flicker of connection, a momentary breach in the walls he'd built around himself. It was dangerous, that feeling, like the first rumble of thunder before a storm that could bring either life-giving rain or devastating lightning, and in this parched land, Quinn Norwood wasn't sure which would be worse. The next morning brought a surprise, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the first promise of rain in months. Quinn eyed them warily as he saddled the horses. "Think it'll actually rain?" Olivia asked, joining him in the barn. She wore a riding skirt today, practical for their journey to recover the wagon. "Hard to say. Storm clouds have teased us before, only to pass right over." Quinn secured the last strap. "Your uncle's staying behind?" "Yes. He's still in considerable pain. I hope that's all right." Quinn nodded, probably for the best. If those clouds do bring rain, the creek bed could flood fast, make the wagon recovery more difficult. They rode in companionable silence, the horses picking their way carefully across the drought-hardened ground. The air felt different, heavy with possibility, the scent of distant rain carrying on the breeze. As they approached the creek bed, Quinn noticed fresh tracks cutting across their path, multiple horses, heavily laden. "Hold up," he said, raising a hand to halt Olivia. He dismounted, examining the tracks more closely. "Raiders passed through here, recently." Olivia tensed visibly. "The wagon." Quinn remounted quickly. "Let's find out." They approached the creek bed cautiously. The wagon remained where they'd left it, but it was immediately clear that someone had been through their belongings. Trunks lay open, contents scattered across the dry ground. Olivia dismounted in a fluid motion, rushing toward the wagon. "Our things." Quinn caught her arm. "Wait, they might still be nearby." She pulled away, hurrying to assess the damage. Quinn scanned the horizon, hand resting on his revolver, but saw no immediate threat. "They've taken all our food supplies," Olivia called, sorting through the mess. "Most of Uncle's research papers are scattered about but seem intact." She reached for a small wooden box, opening it with visible relief. "Thank goodness they left my mother's locket." Quinn joined her, helping to gather what remained. They were after practical supplies, food, ammunition, anything they could sell easily. He lifted a heavy trunk that had been overturned. "We can still salvage the wagon. The wheel's broken, but the axle might be repairable." As they worked to secure what remained of their possessions, the first fat droplets of rain began to fall. Quinn looked up at the darkening sky. "We need to move fast," he said urgently. "When it rains after a drought this long, the ground doesn't absorb it. Flash floods are a real danger." They worked quickly, transferring essential items to their horses, Quinn all the while assessing whether the wagon could be saved. "The axle's damaged, but not beyond repair. If we can get it back to the ranch, I might be able to fix it." A sudden crack of thunder split the air, and the rain began to fall in earnest. Within minutes, they were soaked to the skin. "The creek bed," Olivia called over the downpour, pointing at the dry riverbed that was now showing the first trickles of water. "It's filling." Quinn looked from the wagon to the rapidly rising water. There wasn't time to save both. "Leave it," he shouted. "We need to get to higher ground." The decision made, they mounted quickly, but not before Olivia grabbed one last item from the wagon, a small leather satchel containing her teaching credentials and books. As they urged their horses up the sloping bank, water was already rushing through the creek bed, carrying small debris with surprising force. The rain fell so heavily now that visibility was reduced to mere yards. "Follow close," Quinn called back to Olivia. "The ranch is due west, but the terrain gets tricky in the rain." They rode steadily, the horses struggling against the increasingly muddy ground. Quinn kept glancing back to ensure Olivia was still with him. She rode well, he noted, keeping her seat with the natural balance of someone raised around horses. A mile from the ranch, disaster struck. A lightning bolt crashed nearby, spooking Olivia's horse. The animal reared, throwing her from the saddle before bolting into the storm. Quinn wheeled his horse around immediately, dismounting beside her crumpled form. "Olivia," he turned her gently, fear gripping him when he saw blood mingling with rainwater on her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but conscious. "I'm all right," she murmured, though clearly she wasn't. She tried to sit up and winced in pain. "Don't move," Quinn instructed, quickly assessing her for broken bones. Finding none obviously fractured, he looked around at the worsening storm. They couldn't stay here and she couldn't walk the remaining distance. "I need to get you on my horse," he said. "Can you stand if I help you?" With his support, she managed to get to her feet, swaying slightly. Quinn lifted her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "Stay with me," he said, close to her ear as he urged the horse forward. "We're almost there." "I'm not planning on going anywhere," she replied faintly, leaning back against his chest. By the time they reached the ranch, the rain had transformed the parched landscape into a muddy quagmire. Professor Hammond was waiting anxiously on the porch, his face etched with worry. "What happened?" he demanded as Quinn carried Olivia inside, her head resting against his shoulder. "Horse threw her," Quinn explained tersely, laying her gently on the sofa. She hit her head. "Needs tending." While the professor examined his niece, Quinn gathered clean cloths and his mother's small medicine box. He pumped fresh water, grateful that the rain would replenish his nearly depleted well. When he returned, Olivia was sitting up, looking pale but alert as her uncle cleaned the cut on her forehead. "It's not as bad as it looks," she assured Quinn, though the effort of speaking seemed to cost her. "Head wounds always bleed dramatically," the professor agreed, "but I don't believe she's seriously injured. No signs of concussion that I can detect." Relief washed through Quinn with unexpected intensity. "You should rest," he told her. "Both of you, I need to check the barn, make sure everything's secure for the night." Outside, the rain continued to fall steadily, not the violent downpour of earlier, but a gentle, soaking rain that promised life to the parched earth. Quinn tended to his horse, then secured the barn against the weather. By the time he returned to the house, he was soaked through again, but filled with a cautious optimism he hadn't felt in months. The rain meant survival. For his cattle, for his land, for himself. Inside, he found Olivia alone in the front room, wrapped in a quilt, her damp hair loose around her shoulders. The cut on her forehead had been bandaged neatly. "Uncle Richard has retired for the evening," she said. "His knee was paining him terribly after all the excitement." Quinn nodded, suddenly aware of his dripping clothes. "I should change." "Of course," Olivia said, but then added softly, "Thank you for saving me today." Quinn paused, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "No," she said firmly, "they wouldn't have. I've learned that lesson well enough." Her certainty caught him off guard. What experiences had taught this young schoolteacher such wariness? But it wasn't his place to ask. "You should rest," he said instead, retreating to his room to change into dry clothes. Later, as midnight approached, Quinn found himself unable to sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of rain on the roof. A sound from the front of the house drew his attention, a quiet creaking of floorboards. He rose, pulling on a shirt, and ventured into the main room. Olivia stood by the window, silhouetted against the faint glow of moonlight now breaking through scattered clouds. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, unsurprised by his presence. "The rain," she said simply. "I was listening to it. After so many weeks of dust and heat on the trail, it sounds like music." Quinn moved to stand beside her at the window. Outside, the world was transformed. Puddles reflected the emerging moonlight, and even in the darkness, he could see how his land had already begun to drink in the moisture. "Your ranch will recover now," she observed. "Perhaps," Quinn allowed cautiously, "if the rain keeps up, if we get more through the summer, one storm doesn't end a drought." "But it's a beginning," she countered. "Sometimes that's all we need." "A beginning." Their eyes met in the dim light, and for a moment, Quinn felt an understanding pass between them. Two people who had lost much, who carried their grief closely, who recognized in each other a similar wariness about hope. "Your uncle tells me you write poetry," he said, recalling a detail from dinner conversation the previous evening. A flush of embarrassment colored her cheeks. "Merely a hobby, nothing serious." "I'd like to hear some, if you wouldn't mind." Olivia looked surprised by the request, but after a moment's hesitation, she recited quietly. "The desert waits, repentant and dry. For rain that comes like forgiveness. What blooms after absence proves sweeter for the longing." Her voice faded on the last line, and Quinn found himself strangely moved by the simple verse. "That's from something you wrote?" he asked. She nodded. "Last year after things ended with my fiancé, I felt like that desert for a long time." The confession hung between them, intimate in the quiet night. Quinn felt an unexpected urge to share something equally personal in return, to maintain the delicate balance between them. "My father used to say that ranching was an act of faith," he offered, "planting seeds in dust and believing rain would come." Was he right? Quinn gazed out at his rain-soaked land. "I thought he was a fool, these past 3 years. It seemed like faith was just another word for self-deception." And now, he turned to look at her, this woman who had entered his life as unexpectedly as the storm. "Now I'm not so certain." Olivia winced suddenly, raising a hand to her bandaged forehead. "You should be resting," Quinn said, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, I suppose I should," but she made no move to leave. "It's strange, isn't it, being strangers one day and then circumstances forcing such proximity." "Strange," Quinn agreed, "and dangerous," he thought but didn't say. "Good night, Mr. Norwood," she said finally, moving toward the bedroom. "Quinn," he corrected her, "if we're going to be stranded together by mud for the next few days, you might as well use my given name." She smiled, the first full smile he'd seen from her. "Then good night, Quinn, and you must call me Olivia." "Good night, Olivia." As he watched her disappear into the bedroom, Quinn felt something shift inside him, a settling of dust disturbed by unexpected rain. It was a feeling he'd have to examine later, when he was alone again, when the storm had passed and the world returned to its predictable patterns. For now, he returned to his own bed, listening to the steady rhythm of rain bringing life back to his land. The storm lasted 3 days, turning the ranch into an island amid a sea of mud. During that time, a tentative routine emerged among the three of them. Professor Hammond, his mobility limited by his injured knee, spent his days cataloging what remained of his research papers and regaling them with historical accounts of the Texas frontier. Quinn found himself unexpectedly enjoying the professor's company. The older man's scholarly perspective on the very land Quinn worked daily offered new ways of seeing his inheritance, but it was Olivia who truly transformed the empty house. Despite her own recovery from the fall, she insisted on contributing to the household. She discovered Quinn's mother's old recipes tucked in a kitchen drawer and began preparing meals that reminded Quinn of happier times. She mended torn shirts he'd been neglecting, organized the cluttered pantry, and brought a quiet energy to spaces that had felt hollow for too long. On the 4th day, when the clouds finally broke and sunshine returned, Quinn found himself oddly reluctant to venture out and assess the damage to his land. It would mean returning to reality, to the recognition that his guests would soon continue their journey. Still, duty called. He spent the morning checking on his cattle, finding, to his relief, that all had survived the deluge, and examining the perimeter of his property. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of renewal. Grass already showing green against the mud, wildflowers preparing to bloom, the creek running full for the first time in years. When he returned to the house around midday, he found Olivia on the porch, sketching in a small notebook. Your land is beautiful, she said, showing him the rough drawing she'd made of the ranch house with the newly green pasture beyond. You have talent, Quinn observed, genuinely impressed by her skilled rendering. Just another hobby, she demurred. I've always found drawing helps me remember places better than any written description. Places you've left behind, Quinn noted, a strange melancholy touching him. Olivia studied his face. Yes. But we haven't left yet. The simple statement hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Quinn cleared his throat. The roads will still be too muddy for travel for at least another day or two, he said. And we still need to recover your wagon. About that, Olivia began hesitantly. Uncle Richard and I have been discussing our situation. The wagon was badly damaged from what you described, and much of our journey supplies were taken by those raiders. Quinn waited, sensing there was more. We've been wondering if, that is, would it be possible to hire your services, to escort us to Austin when the road's clear. We could pay you fairly for your time and assistance. The request surprised him. You want me to leave the ranch? I can't do that, the cattle. Just for a week, she interjected. Surely you could find someone to watch over things for that long, your neighbor perhaps. Quinn thought of old Jim Evers, whose small homestead bordered his to the south. The man owed him a favor after Quinn had helped rebuild his barn last spring. I suppose it might be arranged, he said slowly, surprising himself with the admission, but why ask me? There are proper stagecoaches once you reach Sweetwater. Olivia's cheeks colored slightly. After the raiders, Uncle feels we'd be safer with someone we trust, and stagecoaches are expensive. Trust. The word settled uncomfortably in Quinn's chest. These strangers trusted him after just a few days. The notion was as foreign as it was warming. I'll think on it, he promised, not committing either way. That evening, as they finished a simple but satisfying supper, Professor Hammond broached the subject again. Have you considered our proposal, Mr. Norwood? Quinn set down his coffee cup. I have, and I've decided I can take you as far as Sweetwater. From there, you can catch the regular stage to Austin. Oh, but Olivia began to protest. It's the best I can do, Quinn said firmly. I can't leave the ranch for more than 3 days, not with calving season approaching, but I can see you safely to Sweetwater, help you arrange for the stage, and ensure you have proper supplies for the journey. The professor nodded thoughtfully. That seems a fair compromise. We accept your terms. Excellent, Quinn said, rising from the table. We'll leave as soon as the roads are passable, probably 3 days from now. Later, as Quinn sat alone on the porch, smoking and watching the stars emerge, Olivia joined him as had become their evening custom. You're upset about our request, she observed, settling into the chair beside him. Not upset, just practical. I understand. She was quiet for a moment. May I ask you something personal, Quinn? He nodded cautiously. Are you afraid to leave because of your parents, because this place holds your memories of them? The question struck too close to truths he rarely acknowledged even to himself. Maybe, he admitted, but mostly it's just common sense. This ranch is my responsibility. Of course, she agreed softly. Then tell me about them, your parents. What were they like? Normally, Quinn would have deflected such a question. But in the quiet night, with stars spread above and the scent of rain-soaked earth around them, he found himself wanting to answer. My father was stubborn as an old mule, he began. Came out here when there was nothing but wild country and Indian raids, built this place board by board. He took a long drag of his cigarette. My mother was from back east originally, had been a schoolteacher like you're planning to be. How did they meet? He got injured in a skirmish with raiders, ended up recuperating in the town where she taught. Story goes she nursed him back to health, and he convinced her that frontier life with him would be more exciting than teaching arithmetic to town children. Was she happy here? Olivia asked. Quinn considered the question. I think so. At least until the drought came and took everything from her. She wasn't as strong as my father. The hardship wore her down. Or perhaps she was strong in a different way, Olivia suggested gently. Strength isn't just about enduring hardship, Quinn. Sometimes it's about how much love you can hold on to while doing so. The insight struck Quinn deeply. He'd always seen his mother's decline after his father's death as weakness, a failure of will. But perhaps Olivia was right. Perhaps his mother's capacity to love so deeply that loss could destroy her was its own kind of strength. "What about your parents?" he asked, turning the conversation away from his own family. Olivia's expression softened with memory. "My father was a bookbinder. Our home always smelled of leather and glue and paper. My mother was an amateur botanist, constantly pressing flowers between book pages or sketching plant specimens." "How did they die?" Quinn asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. "I'm sorry that was." "No, it's all right," Olivia assured him. "The fire started in my father's workshop, something to do with the chemicals he used for treating leather. They were both trapped inside. I was staying with Uncle Richard that night, learning about constellation mapping." Her voice grew distant. "I've often thought how strange it is that looking at stars saved my life." Quinn reached out impulsively, covering her hand with his own. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "We carry them with us, don't we, the people we've lost?" "Yes," Quinn agreed softly, "I suppose we do." They sat in companionable silence, hands still joined, until the night air grew cool enough to drive them inside. The next morning, Quinn rode out to speak with Jim Evers about watching over the ranch during his absence. He returned by mid-afternoon to find Olivia and the professor packed and ready to depart the following day. "The roads look passable," the professor asked hopefully. "Barely," Quinn confirmed, "but we should be able to make it to Sweetwater if we take it slow. Jim's agreed to check on things while I'm gone." As Quinn prepared for their departure, checking the wagon he would use to transport them, ensuring their route was clear, packing necessary supplies, he found himself increasingly troubled by an unfamiliar sensation. It took him some time to identify it as reluctance, not about leaving the ranch, but about the inevitable parting that would occur once they reached Sweetwater. He had grown accustomed to Olivia's presence, to their evening conversations, to the way she hummed softly while working in the kitchen. The thought of returning to the empty ranch house, to the solitude he had once embraced, now filled him with a vague disquiet. That night, their last at the ranch, Quinn found himself unable to sleep. He stepped outside, breathing in the night air now rich with the scent of growing things. The moon illuminated his land that looked transformed by the recent rains, green shoots pushing through the once parched earth. He heard the door open behind him and knew without looking that it was Olivia. "I couldn't sleep either," she said, joining him at the porch railing. Quinn turned to her, struck by how the moonlight silvered her hair and softened her features. "Are you eager to reach Austin, to begin your new life?" Olivia considered the question carefully. "A week ago I would have said yes without hesitation. Now," she paused, "now I find myself wondering if Austin is still where I'm meant to be." The implication in her words caused Quinn's heart to beat faster. "You're having doubts." "Not doubts exactly, more like new considerations." Their eyes met, and Quinn saw in hers a reflection of his own uncertainty, his own awakening to possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider. "Olivia," he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say. She stepped closer, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. "I know we've only known each other a short time. I know it makes no logical sense. But I feel as though—" "As though what?" Quinn prompted when she faltered. "As though I've found something here I wasn't looking for, something I didn't believe existed anymore." Quinn covered her hand with his own. "I thought the frontier was no place for putting down roots," he said softly. "No place for dreams beyond survival." "And now?" The question hung between them, filled with possibility. Quinn took a deep breath. "Now I'm not so sure," he admitted. "These past days with you and your uncle here, the house has felt alive again. I've felt alive again." Olivia's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "I've felt it too." Slowly giving her every opportunity to pull away, Quinn leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss as gentle as it was profound, a tentative exploration of newfound feelings, of unexpected connection. When they parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered, the words emerging from some deep, previously untapped well within him. "I'll make you smile again." "I promise." Olivia's hand came up to touch his cheek, her eyes searching his. "I can't make that decision tonight, Quinn. There's Uncle Richard to consider and commitments I've made." "I understand," Quinn said, though disappointment coursed through him. "But," she continued, "I promise to consider it. Truly consider it, and when we reach Sweetwater." When we reach Sweetwater, Quinn agreed, understanding her meaning. Decisions would be made then, paths chosen or diverged. The journey to Sweetwater took longer than anticipated. Despite the roads being technically passable, mud and washed-out sections forced frequent detours. What should have been a day's journey stretched into two, requiring them to make camp for the night. As they sat around the campfire that evening, the professor regaled them with tales of early Texas settlements, his academic enthusiasm creating a cheerful atmosphere despite their slow progress. Quinn found himself watching Olivia across the flames, captivated by the play of firelight on her features, by the animation in her expressions as she engaged with her uncle's stories. Later, when the professor had retired to the wagon to sleep, Quinn and Olivia sat side by side, shoulders touching, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Will you miss teaching?" Quinn asked softly. "If you decide not to continue to Austin." Olivia considered the question. "I would miss the idea of it, I think, the sharing of knowledge, the shaping of young minds." She turned to him. "But there are children near your ranch too, aren't there? Children who might benefit from learning." The implication that she was seriously considering staying sent a surge of hope through Quinn. "There are families scattered throughout the area," he confirmed. "No formal school, though." "Perhaps one is needed," she suggested. "Perhaps that's why our wagon broke down on your land, of all places." "You believe in that kind of fate?" Quinn asked, genuinely curious. "I believe that sometimes we find ourselves exactly where we need to be, even when it wasn't where we intended to go." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "My parents believed that. That there was a pattern to life, if only we could step back far enough to see it." Quinn put his arm around her, drawing her closer. The simple intimacy felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they'd known each other far longer than the few days of their acquaintance. "Whatever you decide in Sweetwater," he said quietly, "know that you've changed something in me, Olivia. Something I thought was permanent." She looked up at him questioningly. "You've made me believe again," he explained, "in possibilities, in beginnings after endings." Her smile in response was worth every moment of vulnerability the admission had cost him. They reached Sweetwater by mid-afternoon the following day. The small frontier town bustled with activity. The recent rains had brought travelers stranded by the weather, and the single hotel was reportedly full. "We'll check at the stagecoach office first," Quinn suggested as they made their way down the muddy Main Street. "Find out when the next stage to Austin departs." At the Wells Fargo office, they received unwelcome news. Due to washed-out roads further south, the next stage wouldn't depart for Austin until the following week. "A week," Professor Hammond repeated, dismayed. "But where shall we stay? The hotel is full." The clerk shrugged apologetically. "Town's busier than usual with all the weather delays. Might find lodging at the Widow Parker's boarding house, though she charges dear." Outside the office, they conferred on their options. "I could return to the ranch," Quinn offered. "Come back for you when the stage is ready to depart." The professor looked troubled. "I'm afraid that won't do. Our funds are limited after the raiders took most of our money. A week at even a modest boarding house would strain our resources considerably." Quinn hesitated, then made a decision. "Then you'll both return to the ranch with me. Stay until the roads clear completely. When you're ready to travel to Austin, I'll bring you back." Relief washed over the professor's face. "That's extraordinarily kind, Mr. Norwood. We accept with gratitude." Olivia, who had been silent during the exchange, met Quinn's eyes with a look that conveyed far more than simple thanks. There was a question in her gaze, a hovering possibility that made his heart beat faster. They collected a few necessary supplies in town before beginning the journey back to the ranch. As they traveled, Quinn found himself pointing out landmarks with new enthusiasm, sharing the history of the area as his father had once shared it with him. "That ridge there," he said, gesturing to a rocky outcropping, "was where Comanche scouts used to watch for travelers along the old trail. My father said you could sometimes see the sunlight reflecting off their looking glasses from 20 miles away." "Fascinating," the professor remarked. "The strategic advantage would be considerable." Quinn nodded. "This whole area is rich with history. My father collected stories from old-timers, trappers, even a few peaceful Indians who'd passed through. Used to tell them to me on winter evenings." "You should write them down," Olivia suggested, "before they're forgotten." The idea had never occurred to Quinn. His father's stories were simply part of him, like the calluses on his hands or his knowledge of the land. But Olivia's suggestion sparked something, a recognition that these tales were a heritage worth preserving. "Perhaps I will," he said thoughtfully, with the right encouragement. They arrived back at the ranch as evening approached. The familiar sight of the house, the barn, the surrounding pasture land, stirred an unexpected emotion in Quinn, not the usual sense of duty and responsibility, but something closer to pride. This was his home, and for the first time in years, he felt genuinely glad to return to it. Over the next several days, a curious transformation took place. What had begun as an emergency shelter for stranded travelers evolved into something that felt increasingly like a home for all three of them. The professor, his knee improving steadily, took to cataloging the collection of books Quinn's mother had accumulated over the years. Olivia divided her time between helping with household tasks and exploring the ranch, often sketching scenes that caught her eye. Quinn found himself viewing his land through new eyes, seeing its beauty and potential rather than just its demands and limitations. He began sharing ideas with Olivia as they walked the property together, plans for expanding the herd once the grass was fully restored, for repairing outbuildings long neglected, for perhaps adding on to the house someday. "You sound like a man with a future in mind," Olivia observed during one such conversation, a week after their return from Sweetwater. "I suppose I am," Quinn admitted. "For a long time I've just been existing, surviving. Now I'm thinking about building something again." They had reached the big oak tree behind the house, the tree that shaded his parents' graves. Quinn stopped, gazing at the simple wooden markers. "I think they would approve," he said quietly. "Especially of you." Olivia's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Have you decided to ask me to stay?" she asked directly, her voice steady despite the momentous nature of the question. Quinn turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I have, but I've also been afraid too." "Afraid of what?" "That it's too soon, that you'd think me impulsive or foolish, that you might say no." Olivia squeezed his hands. "Quinn Norwood, in the 3 weeks I've known you, impulsive is the last word I would use to describe you." A smile played at her lips. "As for saying no, perhaps you should ask the question properly and find out." Heart-pounding, Quinn took a deep breath. "Olivia Hayes, will you stay here, with me, not just as a guest, but as," he faltered, then gathered his courage, "as my wife eventually, if you'll have me, to build something together on this land?" Joy illuminated her face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will stay." Quinn pulled her into his arms, holding her close as emotion overwhelmed him. Gratitude, relief, and a happiness he had almost forgotten was possible. "I need to speak with Uncle Richard," Olivia said when they finally separated, "to explain." "We'll talk to him together," Quinn suggested, "if that's all right." They found the professor in the front room, absorbed in one of Quinn's mother's books on Texas plant life. He looked up as they entered, immediately noting their clasped hands and radiant expressions. "I see decisions have been made," he said, closing the book carefully. "Uncle," Olivia began, "I know we had plans for Austin, but—" The professor raised a hand, stopping her. "My dear, I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen how you've blossomed here, how you and Mr. Norwood have grown close. I would be a poor guardian indeed if I insisted on continuing to Austin when your heart has clearly found its home." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "But what about your research, the university position?" "Universities have existed for centuries and will continue to do so," the professor said with a gentle smile. "But love, true love, is a rarer thing." He turned to Quinn. "You intend to marry her, I presume?" "Yes, sir," Quinn confirmed without hesitation, "with your blessing." "You have it," the professor said warmly, "and more than that, you have my gratitude for bringing light back into my niece's life." He paused thoughtfully. "I wonder if perhaps I might impose upon your hospitality a while longer, at least until the wedding. I find I'm rather enjoying the quiet of ranch life for my research." "You're welcome to stay as long as you wish," Quinn assured him. "This is Olivia's home now, which makes it your home too." That evening, as sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Quinn and Olivia stood together on the porch, his arm around her waist as they contemplated their future. "It won't always be easy," Quinn cautioned. "Ranch life has its hardships even in good years." "I know," Olivia replied, "but we'll face them together." She turned in his arms to look up at him. And you'll make me smile just as you promised. Quinn's heart swelled with love for this remarkable woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. Every day, he vowed, sealing the promise with a kiss. 3 months later, as summer gave way to autumn, they were married under the big oak tree, with Professor Hammond officiating and neighbors from miles around attending. The drought had fully broken, bringing a season of unusual abundance. Quinn's cattle were thriving, the pastures lush with growth, and plans for a small schoolhouse on the edge of the property were already underway. As Quinn watched his bride walk toward him, radiant in a simple white dress adorned with wildflowers, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The false belief that had guided him for so long, that the frontier was no place for love, for roots, for anything beyond mere survival, had been replaced by a deeper truth. That love could not only survive on the frontier, but could transform it from a place of hardship into a place of home. And when the professor asked them to exchange their vows, Quinn looked into Olivia's eyes and spoke from his heart. I promise to stand beside you through all seasons, through drought and abundance, through hardship and joy. I promise to build our life together with the same care my father put into building this ranch. And I promise, every day of our lives together, to make you smile. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, a love that had bloomed unexpectedly on parched ground continued to flourish, proving that even in the harshest landscapes, the human heart could find its home.